What's up guys, open-minded gearhead here today with the latest POV test drive video, and this is what we're driving today. This is a 2020 Ford F-150 King Ranch Edition. This is the cowboy truck, and this belongs to a friend of mine who watched the video that I made recently about the TRD Pro Tundra, and he said, if you liked that truck, you got to give my truck a chance. You got to try it out. So not only am I being open-minded about the whole Ford thing as a Toyota fan, but this also has the 3.5 liter V6 twin turbo Ecoboost engine, which typically I am not a fan of any of these twin turbo V6s. So this one is the full Super Crew cab, and then also the 6.5 foot box on the back here, aka the wheelbase of a daggum school bus. But this is a nice looking truck. This thing is mostly stock. As a matter of fact, it's all stock aside from the wheels and tires and the suspension. So he's got a set of black Rhino wheels on here with the fake bead looks, and we've got a set of 35-inch Cooper mud tires. As far as suspension goes, he has added Bilstein 6112s up front, and then in the rear he put a set of 5160s, I believe they are, back here. So yeah, not quite a Raptor, but definitely not an old man truck either. And I think the stance of this thing looks pretty darn good if you ask me. It's sitting nice and level, nice and aggressive. The wheels and tires look good on here. So this is two-tone black, and then the lower is gray, and I like this better than, you know, some of the older trucks, or even some of the other brands of trucks with their like sort of like cowboy trucks. They have black up top and then like a light brown on the bottom, and I don't like that at all. I think this looks pretty good, but one complaint I do have is I think maybe getting rid of the chrome would be a good move here, because especially now with his truck specifically, that he's got the black wheels and everything on here. The chrome grille for sure, and maybe even the chrome headlights. I think if they were gone, this might look a little bit sleeker. Oh, by the way, if you just saw that, this does have a set of motorized steps on it, but these are not the OEM ones. These are actually Amp Research ones, and surprise, surprise, they get stuck sometimes, just as Amp steps do. They seem to all be plagued with that, but anyways, let's take a look at the engine here. Hood latch on these things, I don't know. Okay, again, I'm a Toyota fan. I like things that are super intuitive and well thought out, and this is like, it's hard to grab. I know it's a stupid thing to complain about, but whatever. Anyways, 3.5 liter twin turbo V6, and when I asked him what kind of power and torque figures this thing makes, he didn't really remember off the top of his head, but he did say, well, it's enough to roast a set of 35-inch tires in second gear. So the actual figures here on this Ecoboost, there's 375 horsepower and 470 foot-pounds of torque, which is really impressive for a small displacement V6 like this. But it's kind of the norm with these newer trucks now. So he actually owned a previous F-150 with the Coyote 5-liter V8 engine in it, and I asked him point blank today, I said, do you like this better than the V8? Because he's always been kind of like myself. He's a die-hard car enthusiast as well. He likes the V8s, and he said he actually does like this Ecoboost better than the Coyote. He said that this thing gets much better fuel economy, especially like even when you're using it, but he said like on the highway, at higher speeds on the highway, it's just sipping gas, and that's where you notice the biggest improvement. He said this tows better with the extra torque and everything. So one more thing, when you compare this turbo V6 to the 5-liter V8, this actually makes 20 less horsepower than the V8 does. I know, womp womp. However, this makes 70 more pound-feet of torque than the V8 does, which seems kind of backwards, but I think it's pretty impressive. Fun fact, the owner of this truck is the guy that roasted my 4Runner in that previous video. So I have to point out a few things here, like his awesome bed liner here, Ford build quality, that's velcroed on and falling apart. And also, I don't know if you can see it back in there, but there's like a felt kind of a scatter shield, like a splash shield or something down there that keeps falling down, he said, and it won't stay up. The clips keep popping off. A little bit of Ford build quality there for you. But with that said, before you Ford fans freak out on me, one of his biggest selling points to this truck that he said is the reason why he loves it so much is look at the undercarriage of this thing. It might be kind of hard to see on camera, but this thing is a 2020 model, so it has seen 4 Ontario winters. It's never been oil sprayed or rust proofed or anything, and there is absolutely no rust on the undercarriage of this truck whatsoever. Now obviously, because this is a King Ranch model, we have the sort of cowboy inspired interior in here, and much like any of the other full-size pickup trucks, it is gigantic inside. Lots of space, lots of features. And this has like the sort of brown leather theme, and it's interesting to me that You know, this is like regular normal leather now. I don't know if you remember, but the original King Ranch trucks, part of their kind of claim to fame was that they had like that raw finished leather that was almost like suede and kind of hard to clean. Anyways, fun fact, a little side note there, those leather conditioners that everybody loves to use to hydrate the hide, those are the only seats that would actually be able to do anything with. This is all coated leather. This all has like a kind of a plastic clear coat on it. So I guess the King Ranch leather now, it's more of a color option than it is like an actual different seat. This looks like it's just normal kind of regular leather seats from a higher trimmed F-150. Of course, being the Super Crew, that means that we have a nice big back seat here. Is it as big as the Crew Max on the Tundra? Not quite. I think this is going to be a little bit smaller, but the trade-off is we do have the option of a 6.5 foot bed back here. And the Tundra only has a 5.5 foot. So you lose a little bit of interior space back here, but this is still more than enough. It's only been 4 years, but already the screens that came in these slightly older trucks seem so tiny compared to what's on the market nowadays. Everybody's so crazy with their huge Tesla style screens on these things, but I think this is perfectly good enough. Yeah, we got no sunroof up top. That's one feature that's missing. Otherwise, I believe this thing is pretty much decked out. We've got like heated and cooled and massaging seats. Anyways, let's hop in this thing. Let's take this thing for a drive and let's compare it to my favorite pickup truck, which is the 5.7 Tundras. Okay, so the reason why I'm so curious about this truck and why I think this is such a good comparison with the TRD Pro Tundra that I drove in that other video is that they're both 2020 models. They both have kind of similar suspension setups, and they're both on 35-inch tires, and they're both owned by my idiot buddies. So I think surprisingly, the very first thing that jumped out at me when I started driving this truck was actually the seating position and the fact that you sit like really low in this in comparison to the Tundra or any truck that I've driven really. Even the 4Runner in Tacoma, I feel like you sit more higher up and you're looking out over everything. I feel very low. The steering wheel feels really high up, and oh wow, it handles the speed bumps pretty well. It's kind of nice to have the steering wheel kind of up higher in front of you. And with that said, the visibility on this truck is really good. I would almost say it's better than the Tundra with the Crew Max cab. You know, the double cab Tundras are not great just because of the shape of that side window on the back. It's got a big pillar on it, so it's a bit of a blind spot. But yeah, visibility of this truck, I think overall, this feels smaller than it actually is when you're driving it. It feels much more natural to drive. The Tundras feel big, and it kind of like has you on your toes, like, oh, am I going to fit around this corner? Am I too close to the curb? But this, it really does feel smaller than it is, which I guess it could cause you some trouble if that's the case. Handles pretty well with this Bilstein suspension too. So it's also worth noting that the Bilstein setup on this truck, so the 6112s up front and then the 5160s in the back, I do believe that that is almost exactly the same setup that the early model TRD Pro Tundras had before they switched to the Fox setup. So this is kind of more comparable to a Tundra than maybe a lot of people would realize right off the bat. Alright, so at partial throttle like that, that wasn't full throttle or anything, so I don't think the tranny kicked down to a low enough gear. It felt like it was kind of bogged down, and I'll say it's a little bit underwhelming in that case. It doesn't have that super nimble feel. I felt like a little bit of turbo lag. I think maybe what I'm noticing though is maybe more due to the 10-speed trans in this thing. I think it's a little bit clunky, and it seems to be that that's the case with any of these 10-speed transmission trucks from any of the automakers. I think that's just kind of part of being a 10-speed. They're all a little bit clunky. There's just so many gears for them to choose from, maybe, that sometimes they just don't get it right. These seats are nice and comfy, which is to be expected with one of these sort of higher end model trucks. This is intended to be more of like a luxury truck, and it's kind of cool. The King Ranch, I think, was the very first one to do the sort of like the cowboy inspired truck. And without the King Ranch, you wouldn't have trucks like the 1794 Tundra, I don't think, because they were the ones that kind of made it cool, and then the other trucks had to follow suit. I will say it's kind of cool to hear the turbos whistling. It almost kind of feels like it's a diesel or something. When you give it some throttle, you can hear them whistling. And I think that, like, for me, that's not something that I've felt in a pickup truck ever. Of course, I own a turbo MR2, so I'm no stranger to turbochargers and the sounds that they make, but in something big like this and with these kind of characteristics, it definitely feels different. And does that make up for the lack of exhaust note with the little V6? I don't think so. I think that's still going to be the biggest kind of sticking point for me, is just the sound. And the one thing is that, you know, they are piping some kind of sound into the cabin here, like an artificial sound. There's no question about that. You can hear it. And so inside the truck, I will say it doesn't sound that bad. It kind of sounds like a V8 in here. But the fact that you have to even do that in the first place, I think, is kind of disappointing to me. But also, if it's like a computerized sound that's coming through the speakers, can I change the track and like switch it to a LS with a big cam in it? Because maybe then I would like it more. Overall, this thing is really smooth and quiet. I'm quite impressed with that. So this truck, this is a 2020 model, and it has, what has it got? 120, almost 127,000 kilometers on the clock. So this is not a brand new truck. This is not like a test vehicle or anything. Again, I'm not one of those guys. This is somebody's actual work truck that they use as a pickup truck. He tows with it. He's always loading it up with parts and equipment and stuff. It seems to be holding up really well, for the most part. You know, there's a couple of things that I pointed out when we were still back at the house. Maybe there's a few extra squeaks and rattles that this truck has over the Tundra, but we have to keep in mind that the Tundra that I filmed, I think it only had like 40,000 kilometers on it, so it was still basically a baby. But this is maybe an accurate idea of how these F-150s age, with a little bit of like real world miles on them. I think a lot of people are going to have this kind of mileage on their truck. So it's good to know that it seems to hold up really well. I definitely notice, I can't quite tell whether it's turbo lag or if it's just the way that the transmission is tuned that makes it a little bit laggy. We're going to try it a little bit when we get to a more open section. We're going to try putting this into sport mode. Maybe changing the drive mode is going to affect that a little bit. I don't know, we'll find out. Yeah, you can hear the turbo spooling, and then when they light up, this thing really pulls hard. So I think it's interesting that the little V6 actually makes way more torque than the 5-liter V8 in these trucks. And as much as I want to be team V8, you have to ask yourself, what's the more important statistic on a truck like this, like on a bigger pickup truck? I think you want to prioritize torque, don't you? One thing I've noticed, I got a bit of a gripe here. You know, in the Toyotas, I complain that the steering is too light, especially for the size of the vehicle. It doesn't feel like you're driving a large, heavy vehicle. And I feel like the F-150 here, it suffers from the same issue, but on top of that, there's sort of like a dead spot in the top of the steering where you just don't feel anything from the road at all. And the weird thing is that it's there sometimes, and sometimes it's not. It's kind of unpredictable. Sometimes you grab the wheel and the truck immediately turns, and then sometimes it just feels like you're kind of floating a little bit. I don't know if that is maybe an alignment setting with this specific truck, because it is lifted. It is running an aftermarket suspension setup. So I'm not sure if a factory F-150 would feel the same way. Maybe it's like a caster setting or something, I don't know. Or maybe it's just the way that the electric steering is tuned on these things. It does handle great though, especially for the size of the truck that it is, and this super long wheelbase. Actually, let's talk about the wheelbase on this thing, because visually, when you're outside looking at it, this thing is long, like super long. And I was expecting the turning radius to be really bad, but honestly, it isn't really bad at all. I'm trying to, again, compare it to the Tundra with the Crew Max configuration, which is a fairly long truck itself. And I would think, just based on looks, just by looking at both trucks, I would think that this truck is going to have a worse turning radius. But it feels a lot more similar to that Toyota than I thought it would. It's definitely got some get up and go. There's no question about that. It seems like the transmission, like you can kind of watch what gear you're in and the numbers down here, and it kind of seems like it jumps a few gears sometimes, and sometimes, like when you're getting on and off the throttle, it doesn't really know what gear to start you back into. And sometimes it gets it wrong, so sometimes it kind of bogs down in too high of a gear, And you have to give it a little bit more throttle to kind of pop it out of that. But yeah, what do you guys think about the interior on these sort of Texas-inspired trucks, all the brown stuff and everything? Are you a fan? Comment down below if you think that this is like a luxury interior, or if you think they're a little bit tacky. I like it. I think it's definitely comfortable. I am noticing now as I'm driving a little bit of a rattle developing somewhere. That might just be something in the glove box or something too, for all I know. But everything in here is pretty well laid out. I think normally I give the Japanese a pretty good credit for sort of how intuitive they design their vehicles. But this is kind of similar. It feels like things are in spots that make sense. Obviously the screen here is small by today's standards, right? Like, to me though, it's plenty big. I don't need a huge gigantic screen with all of the stuff. We've got actual knobs to use. So I would much rather have that than have all of the settings be on a touch screen. We have regular needles in the gauge cluster, you know, like regular gauges. It's not all digital stuff. The new Fords have sort of weird looking like LCD screens in there that I'm just not a fan of. I don't like them. I like this better. I think maybe I'm getting old, and maybe I'm that guy now that says they don't make them like they used to, but I feel like this is kind of a good balance between sort of like classic old school stuff with a lot of the modern technology that you get in brand new vehicles. All right, let's hit this rough road and see how this Bilstein setup feels. What are you guys doing? Picking berries or something? Friggin' weirdos. This road is getting kind of grown in to be driving such a big truck on, man. I don't want to pinstripe his paint down the side here, but... So, okay, so overall, the suspension is very, very controlled over this stuff. And again, this is a really rough road. It's doing a great job. It's a little on the firm side. I think it's stiffer than the TRD Pro Fox suspension. I think maybe there's a little bit too much rebound. It feels like the wheels are kind of driving back into the ground a little bit too hard over bumps, and that's causing it to feel like a little bit bouncy. I'm feeling more in the road surface than I do in the TRD Pro or with the Fox setup on my 4Runner. Yeah, this is definitely firmer for sure, and it's not a complaint. I mean, I'm really nitpicking here by making that comparison with like the rebound and stuff. Okay, now this truck feels bigger. Now that I'm on a really tight road and trying to squeeze past other cars, it's feeling its size now. Let's change the drive mode here to sport mode. And also, I'd like that the drive modes are just on a button here on the shifter. You don't have to go through a whole bunch of settings in the system and a whole bunch of menus and stuff. I like that because, man, vehicles are just getting so complicated nowadays. Let's see what kind of jam this Ecoboost makes. Let's see if it lives up to the hype of everybody saying that V8s are dead. All right, it's not bad. It's different than I was expecting. It's a different feel, and the fact that for some reason I was assuming that a 10-speed transmission is going to be going through the gears quite a bit, but that little pull there, I think it just held one gear and just kept pulling. So to me, it does feel like a turbocharged engine. I think a lot of the people that are claiming that it feels exactly the same as the V8, it just gets better fuel economy, I'm not buying that. I don't agree with it. I can feel the difference. I think the torque that this engine produces when the turbos are fully lit feels V8-like, but the way that it's delivered is different than a V8. It's fast, I'll give it that. It's definitely quick. I don't know what it sounds like on the outside from the exhaust, but I can guarantee you it doesn't sound as good as it sounds on the inside here. Yeah, nice strong brakes. It's so funny hearing the turbo whistle on this thing, man. I thought that was just for diesels. These Cooper mud terrain tires, you can definitely hear them howling as you're driving down the highway at these highway speeds, but they are noisy for sure, but it's just the same for any mud terrain tire. I don't see anything different about these than, say, the Generals on the Tundra, or they're still louder than my Goodyear Duratracs, but technically the Duratrac is an all-terrain tire, and this is a legit mud tire, so that's just kind of par for the course, I guess. It's kind of weird. That's when you're just kind of like idling down the highway like this, it's the only sound that this thing makes is just the sound of the tires. You don't hear any exhaust or any of the, they don't pipe any of the intake sounds into the cabin when you're at light throttle. I think that's just when you're giving it the business. This thing is really good at pretty much everything. I think it does a really good job. You feel a little bit distant from the outside world, maybe. Got some hippies on bicycles up here. Are you guys happy? I'm driving a turbo V6 in a full-size truck. You got what you wanted. You can have your climate back. Hey, you guys want to see something cool? That's the YouTuber Hacksmith over there. He's huge. I think he's got like, I don't know, 14 million subscribers or something crazy like that. That's where he films all of his videos, apparently. Let's give her another honk here. Yeah, it gets up and goes, that's for sure. Now, the million-dollar question is this Ecoboost F-150 better than a 5.7 Toyota Tundra? That's, I think, what we all want to know. That's what I want to know. I think it's a little bit complicated. I think it depends on how you're looking at it. I think if you're thinking in terms of like features and amenities and kind of like the luxury items, the technology, the Ford wins. It's kind of no secret that the big three have been modernizing their trucks way before Toyota started doing that. This truck makes similar horsepower. I think it's only like 10 horsepower less than Toyota's 5.7, but it makes way more torque. But here's the thing, like, for me as a car enthusiast, I can't get past the sound. And you know, character is really important to me, and I just feel like there is just nothing quite like a V8, especially with, you know, an aftermarket exhaust on it. And it might not be the most fuel efficient, and it might not even make the most horsepower, but in terms of driving feel and character and sound and just the overall experience behind the wheel, I'm gonna still give it to the V8. The turbo sounds in this are cool. Do they make up for the fact that the exhaust sound is so horrendous? No, not for me. Interior wise, I think, you know, this is a King Ranch. This is a pretty highly optioned truck, and it's definitely nice. I do really like the saddle brown seats. Overall though, this F-150 is a really nicely built truck. This one is built in the Kansas factory, so it's made in America. You know, it seems for the most part well built. There's like a couple minor build quality issues. It's nothing to really complain about. It's not like the big three, you know, even 10-15 years ago that they had a little bit more quality control issues and stuff. This feels like a really solid truck. It's very smooth, it's very refined. I really like the suspension that he added to this. The Bilstein setup is really nice. The wheels and tires on this, I mean, the mud tires are a little bit noisy, but they look super cool. And honestly, a little howl on the highway suits a truck like this. I think it's kind of nice. I think you want that kind of soothing hum as you're driving out in the country in your King Ranch pickup truck. It fits it. Cruising on the highway here, we're doing what? About 70-75 mile an hour for you Americans. And this truck is super smooth. You know, it's got a little bit of a bounce, a little bit of wobble in the tires, but they're off-road tires. You're gonna have that. I can hear the turbo whistling a little bit on like the elevation changes when we start climbing a little. It's kind of cool. I don't know if it's gonna show up on camera or not. Can you guys hear the whistle? So, you know, that's the fake sound that they pipe into the cabin. I don't know about that. So what do you think, guys? Would you take this F-150 specifically with the suspension and the wheel setup over a TRD Pro Tundra with a V8? Or would you get an F-150 with the 5-liter Coyote engine? What do you prefer? What do you think is the best full-size pickup truck right now? What's the best buy? Comment below what your thoughts are, and I will catch you on the next video. See ya.